All right, welcome once again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. Today should be short and sweet. We're just going to talk a little Witcher.
Well, you said short and sweet. I have 2 hours before I even have to start getting ready for this thing. So, first up, since it is social distillation, you said you poured you a drink. What'd you pour?
Vodka and root beer.
Vodka and root beer. Okay, that's always my backup here. But for the main course, we got my famous Sammy Mule, a Moscow Mule. It's how I got my nickname. And when people hear it, I always make up a story. But originally people would say you need to have a Sammy Mule. And then someone just started calling me Sammy Mule. And so the stories go from there. But everybody says, what do you do special? I make it like it's supposed to be making. Made.
Macon.
We might have to start this one over. Shit. I haven't even started drinking it yet. I make it like stories, it's supposed to be made, which is well, I told you this was relevant.
Yeah.
We got the Playboy Bartender's Guide right here. Not only does it have recipes, but it also tells you how to stock your bar and why things are done a certain way, all high class, as they were set up to be. But Moscow Mule, page 235, 1.5 to 2 ounces vodka, half a lime or half an ounce, and iced ginger beer. That's it. Don't put mint in it. Don't put a little something extra that you say you're going to call it this extra kind of mule or something like every restaurant does. Vodka, lime, ginger beer, 3 to 1 to fill the glass. And you do have to do it in the copper. Lots of theories on why that works. I think it's for the same reason you put copper in your still, because it pulls some of the sulfur out. So any little sulfur left in whatever you put in there gets pulled out and it makes it a more pure flavor. That's my theory. I'm sticking to it, but it does taste different out of the copper glass or copper cup than it does out of a regular cup.
Speaking of making up stories, how many people did we convince that your heart surgery scar was a shark attack?
Quite a few. Back in the Oklahoma State days, we'd tell everybody that story.
And it was so bizarre that we had got anyone to believe it because it's completely nonsensical because of where the scar is.
Yeah, so it goes from here all the way around here because they cut you open this way and then pull you open and then come in from the side back in those days before laparoscopic surgeries. And I think even for that one now, they just go up your leg. So, but yeah, so it's a massive scar that goes from side to side, but you can tell it's a incision scar.
Yeah.
And
yeah, it's nice and clean and
yeah,
thin. Yeah.
And they even Frankenstein that side back together pretty well. So a lot of times I even have to tell people that it's there unless they're really paying attention. So,
yeah.
But yeah, always have a good story. We got to figure out one for that one.
You don't want to go with the I used to be 350 pounds and look at me now. You should hire me to get you in shape.
Well, it only looks like a stretch mark now because
the
pec hasn't filled back out yet. So it's got that little bit of crinkle to it. So when I'm finally able to work that out, which should be soon, that'll fill back out, and hopefully it'll fill back out. I want to get at least somewhat back to where I was.
Yeah.
But like we said in the intro, we're going to talk some Witcher. I don't know how long that's going to take because unlike our pre-Wheel of Time episode, we have a season of material for their adaptation. So we're not speculating as much. We kind of know how they're going to go about it.
Yeah. Adaptation wise, I think we could maybe speculate a little bit on story. But I don't know how much to contribute to that because I don't know the source material at all.
Well, and I have
limited
from and I have limited source material exposure because I just played some of the video games. Now we are going to, as soon as this computer problems go away, have a friend on who does know all the source material, at least a pretty good amount of it. when it comes to
including some degree of the books and short stories as well.
which I do have questions about, because I see differences between the game and the movie, and not the movie, the series, even though it's kind of the same story going along.
Yeah.
But I'm curious as to if the changes I'm seeing are to make it more like the book, or if they were screen adaptations for, because I would think it would be easier to adapt a video game to the screen than it would be the book itself.
You think that, and yet I think every single video game adaptation, except for the first Mortal Kombat movie and bizarrely the Sonic the Hedgehog movie recently, were complete and total disasters. And financial flops. Bad. I mean, Super Mario Brothers is widely considered in the running for one of the worst movies of all time.
In all fairness, it's hard to take the premise of Super Mario Brothers as a whole seriously enough to make a serious movie that is actually something people will take seriously.
Well, and that's, I think, a good kind of a good segue into it, at least for me, why The Witcher works is, so I watched, I haven't watched it yet. My kids are kind of past the age to where we would like sit down or go to the Sonic movie. I think it is more of a family kids movie, but I watched a breakdown of it, of why it worked and why it was ludicrously successful, especially, as I said, compared to every other video game movie that has come along that has been kind of, well, I guess the Tomb Raider, the Angelina Jolie Tomb Raider movies did okay financially, but really considering the huge market of some of these video game franchises, you know, to not be able to pull in some of that market for a movie adaptation. But what they did with Sonic is they didn't try and adapt the video game. They adapted the ideas of the video game. So they took the basic, you know, the basic bones of the video game with a little bit of the, you know, the lore and the story, what little there is, and even a little bit of they actually came up with a kind of real world way to make the coins work for Sonic. But then they just made a good story. They just made kind of a classic fish out of water person trying to find a place to belong. And then they structured that really well, so that there was something I'm going to rant about when we talk Wheel of Time, is stakes. That by giving an emotional angle to Sonic and to the human who he befriends, and giving them kind of similar arcs, that then you create stakes. You make the audience invested in the characters. So I I mentioned the new Godzilla and King Kong movies, and one of the dangers of doing a movie like that, really any action movie, is I like big dumb action as much as the next guy, but
we'll get to that with Wheel of Time on the last episode too.
But do you want to make something that someone's just going to have on in the background and not pay attention to, or do you want to make something that pulls the audience in? So the first Godzilla movie was kind of widely panned, and I don't know that they would have made the sequels if they hadn't already committed money and started working on those. Because the first one, a lot of people were annoyed because you got very little monster in that one. It was too focused on the humans, and the point of that is they were trying to pull you in so that it was more than just a monster fight, but there was something more going on there.
And there was a story that would say, hey, this is going to continue on, versus monster fight, and you're like, okay, monster one, what's next? Oh, we're going to see monster fight again.
Yeah,
that's going to get old eventually.
I think maybe a better example that way more people would have seen is the MCU, the Marvel movies when they were still good.
Mm-hmm.
Um, oh no, the world is going to end in the first Avengers, which was the finale of that arc of the first group of movies and the first section of story. Oh no, the world is going to end. Okay, well, yeah, that those are big stakes, but it's nothing you can relate to unless unless you have characters there that are pulling you as the viewer into it. The world's always going to end. That's kind of the trope of fantasy sci-fi type stories, right? So it's just going to be same old
Well,
unless
see,
you've
you had
got
brought up a
something there.
concept, and I don't know if this is a good place to put it in because one of my examples was going to be relative to the Marvel universe and the Netflix versus the big screen adaptations
Mm-hmm.
to them. Because you had talked about bringing up to set the stage of what we what we look for, what we like in movies and TV series adaptations of other things, and to give off examples of that. And one of my examples was my preference for the Netflix Daredevil uh, adaptation versus that type. That was my favorite of those adaptations.
Mm-hmm.
That type of adaptation versus the MCU, which was ultra high powered and the world's going to end and these things
Mm-hmm.
that are gods are protecting us.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Daredevil struggled and he went through the nitty gritty of getting through the process. Uh, so that was going to be one of my examples for that reason. It was something you can watch and get engaged with and be like, wow, that could be real life to some
Well,
degree.
and I don't think it's an accident that um Tony Stark, Iron Man, it seems to be the most um, beloved and popular of the MCU characters because it started out smaller.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't the world is going to end. It was just about Tony and Stark Industries, really. Those were the stakes. And he started off as an interesting character, as a amusing but really unlikable asshole. And then he becomes likable, and then he becomes good, like an actual good guy. So he has this development, and then
But you could say the same for Spider-Man,
mhm,
which is kind of sharing publicity together now because of the Stark Spider-Man connection. If they could just decide on an actor for once, for the end of it.
yeah,
But yeah, all of those started small with just Peter Parker becoming Spider-Man, and ultimately the local villain was
yep.
the big bad guy.
Well, and that's why I think Spider-Man has always been, since his inception, such a popular character because it's it's smaller in scope, so
Mhm.
you're able to focus more, if that makes sense.
Well, yeah. Well, you're able to humanize the story more, I
Mhm.
think. Uh, and yeah, people want big and bad, but also people want to identify. And it's really hard to do both at the same time.
Yeah.
It's really hard to identify with Thor. It's
Yeah.
really easy to identify with a young kid who can do more than he thought he
Mhm.
could all of a sudden, but he's still a young kid.
Yeah. Well, oh no. Well, Thor is a good example because um you have the potential there of the Superman problem. How do you relate to Superman when he's, nigh invulnerable and can do anything? And
Mhm.
that's always been a problem with, I mean, Superman's one of my favorite characters, but I do recognize that he's very rarely done well.
Mhm.
Because of that danger of Thor
Yeah, the only
is,
way he works is Lex Luthor knows his weakness. That's the
yep,
only way he works.
yeah. But Thor, as an example, because of that thread through the MCU and it being such a good example of good storytelling, is Thor is a potential pitfall, and you see it more as the MC movies progress through to Endgame.
Mhm.
Thor is the most, by far the most powerful of the Avengers. You
They,
know,
they they make a point to that Hulk is getting equal. in a lot of
yeah,
ways.
Is getting
And the
there.
comic book nerds tell me Hulk becomes a god of some sorts.
Yeah,
Later in the comics,
but I mean, for crying out loud, he's withstanding a blast from a star to reignite that forge. And then he pretty much single-handedly handles Thanos when he's beating the ever living crap out of everybody else. And he you know, completely took down Hulk earlier. So in that current state, Thor is by far the most powerful. But what they did with the first movie to pull you in is make daddy issues, because anyone can relate to daddy issues to, to some degree or another. That story became about someone who's a grown man, but is essentially a rebellious teenager.
Well, not only that, another weakness in that he had a brother that knew how to manipulate him to no end.
Yeah. So
they did make him vulnerable mentally.
Yeah, exactly. And so by creating that vulnerability and taking the time to develop and show that vulnerability, it pulls you in and lets you relate to this ludicrously overpowered character who otherwise would just be, well, frankly, it would be Rey from Star Wars, from the Star Wars sequels. Is this person has no weaknesses and just handles anything that comes in front of her. That's boring. Not only is it completely unrelatable, but it's also completely boring. It's why grumpy old nerds like us complain about the good old days of NES and the stupidly hard games on the NES.
Well, see, to me, the games now are hard because I took the 10-year hiatus from gaming and they're so different.
Yeah.
Which when we'll get back to The Witcher in about 30 seconds, I say, because that is one of my good reviews of the game itself. Is the controls were complicated because there was a lot of complicated things in it, but not so much that an old guy couldn't get them down. Whereas we've played Final Fantasy 14, the scenes are everything happening so fast, the colors are everywhere, and people are like, get off that and they do this, and which is really hard for a colorblind guy. And that moment did hit once. There's a setting, but it didn't seem to help. Where some people will help you because it's online and you're playing with other people, and they're like, you keep getting on this thing. I'm like, what thing? They're like, the circle. And I was like, what circle? And they said, the red one. I said, I don't see it. I can't see it. I can't see the red circle. And so I just had to start guessing when the pattern of the battle was going a certain way. And thankfully, they were all cool with me being dumb and not being able to keep up with everything. And we finally got through it. But back to Witcher, yeah, they were complicated because you've got the 2 buttons here, the 3 here, and then you got to switch back and forth every once in a while. And God forbid you draw the wrong sword when you're fighting something.
A 4-way cursor and AB.
So there was that, but at the same time, it was simple enough that if you just after playing for about an hour or two, you can handle the basics, and then by the time you're done with a game that takes 30 or so hours, I don't know how long my gameplay was because I get distracted when I'm playing, but 30 or so hours, and if you do all the side quests even more, then yeah, you're going to get it down eventually just from repetition. And it progresses you slowly enough that you're not getting too much at once, because you can't do everything in the beginning in some games. In some games you can do everything from the beginning. You got to learn all the controls at once. Someone told me, play Fortnite. And this is when I was just getting back into gaming. So people can timeline that right when Fortnite was getting big. And I got on there, I was like, okay, I downloaded it, the free version, got on, parachutes you in. I'm like, okay, this button does this button does this.
And
sniped.
You were dead.
Yeah, sniped. And I was like, oh, delete. That's the one reason I hate player versus player games, because there's they need a stratosphere for the rookie to come in and be able to learn all of that. So, but yeah, even the Madden games, they got so complicated as it went on that they're just no fun anymore unless you sit in your basement and play Madden, 5 hours a day. which I know people that did. And but yeah, it's just so complicated right now.
Right. So I think the gaming is a good analogy to the filmmaking. You know, you don't want something so dense in story that you can't penetrate it, but you don't want something so simple that it bores you because you
hold on. Chuck just sent us a shit ton of memes for possible covers. Oh,
well,
when y'all meet Chuck next week, or go back to what is it, episode 5 or 7? I think it's 7 because I just uploaded 5 to Rumble. I think it's 7. We do one with his previous military experience, but he's going to be our guest for Witcher because he's read all or at least most of the books and played all the games.
He had been,
and he has a channel where they play Witcher and go
Twitch, through a Twitch channel, the Affable Gentleman on Twitch, where he was playing through Witcher 3. But where was I? Oh yes,
gaming is a good analogy to the film.
Yeah. So, did you ever play the Batman game on NES? It was the movie tie-in.
The original NES, and then plug it in.
Yep.
No, I did not play that one.
It was an incredibly difficult game, but it wasn't impossible until you got to the end. It wasn't impossible. So it was incredibly challenging. You would die a lot, but you would start to get the hang of it. You would start to get better. You were still able to make progress. So it was very rewarding once you started to get deeper into it. Now, when I got to the Joker, I had to hand it over to my cousin, who was like an NES and SNES savant, because I could not beat him. But it found that balance of being really difficult but not impossible. Same thing with storytelling. Is if it's too simplistic, you're going to get bored. You're going to get distracted. It's going to turn into a have on in the background while you're doing chores movie, because you don't care that much. But on the other hand, you can have stories that are so dense. It's like, what? Huh? I don't get it, because either it's too complicated, the characters are too unrelatable, or whatever.
Or the length of the game matters too. Now, one smart thing some of these RPG creators started doing, and I don't know where it started, but the first I saw it was in Final Fantasy games, is that they started including the collectible game section of it. In Witcher, it's Gwent. In Witcher, it's the card game Gwent. In what was it, Final Fantasy 9?
The card game.
8 had the card game. 9 had the blitz ball game, I think.
10
had the blitz ball game. But these were things where if you started getting kind of burnt out on the story, you could take a break and just collect these cards for a while and do something completely different, which was a card game versus, but you were still playing the game and you were still collecting things. Some of us are completionists. We like to get as close to 100% of the game as we can on that. I know you are, for sure. If I really like the game, I will be. The Lego games, me and my son try to get 100% on them. We're doing DC villains right now, so that's good father-son time, because he's the games he likes and the things I like to do, which usually isn't actually gaming. That kind of comes together, and it's kind of a compromise for both of us, and we both have fun. But we like to try to get 100% on that. But those little side things, they kind of let you take a break from it, and then you can go back to the story and then get back to playing. So that was pretty smart to put those in there.
It breaks up the intensity, so to speak, in the same way that if you've got a really good deep story in an action movie, then those action scenes break that up. It's like comic relief in a serious movie.
Well, I was going to say even comic relief in an action movie, if it's done right.
Right. So, so for instance, I brought up Iron Man to kind of set the stage is you have kind of this deep, intense thing when Tony Stark is captured by terrorists, and his life is in danger, and then things start to get technical as he's doing something. And then you get a break when he gets the prototype Iron Man suit and starts blowing everybody away. So you get a break there. And then that scene ends, and then we go back to the character stuff. And we start to create depth and complexity there, and then we start to get some more kind of action sequences.
Okay, so back to The Witcher. Let's get your take, because I kind of know what I want to say about it, the previous season, and what to think about the new one. But I don't want to give away too much for first-time viewers, because there is something that's kind of a big plot point, but it's kind of a spoiler at the same time.
Yeah.
Now, spoiler alerts if we say something too much out
I'll try to.
But there is something that if you just watch the show, it might have made the first like 4 episodes not make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, so I'm trying to think of how to say this as generally as possible. There are basically 3 main characters, 3 storylines through the first season that are all weaving together. And so what I said earlier, one of the reasons I was trying to set the stage with stakes and relating to characters is I believe it opens with the queen lady, the warrior queen lady thing, right? And it's the kingdom is being invaded, and again, it's a trope. It's the same old with fantasy. But one of the things I think they did well is creating this idea of the 3 storylines that they go between, because it could have been well, when it starts, it's like, who is this lady? Who are these people? Why do I care that their kingdom is being invaded? Who are that? And they just kind of give you a broad outline of good guys and bad guys, but they don't really take the time yet to show you why these are the good guys, these are the bad guys. So I think it helps when they cut away from that. They just kind of set the stage. They cut away from that. And then when they come back to that storyline, they give you a little more depth to the characters to make you care about them when things start to go bad.
One thing I thought they did kind of poorly in The Witcher, which I actually have mostly positive reviews, so I'm gonna go ahead and start with the negative this time instead of like I've been trying to do, is they also, just like we complained about with Wheel of Time, they also did a bad job of scope of geography.
Yeah.
Because it was almost like one place was right next to the next. And every once in a while in conversation, they would use the word north or use the word south, but you really kind of would have been confused about where everything was.
Yeah.
And when we went back to the Game of Thrones, where they did that well, we talked about, and I kind of rethought this after our conversation, we talked about it would have been copying to do it a lot that way. But if it's the best way to do it, is it really copying?
Yeah.
If it's the best way to do it, we just learn from somebody else. And that's how we get good at a lot of things,
Right.
But
well, and how much can you really care about copying when a fair criticism of pretty much any modern fantasy story, I use the modern in the historian context of anything in the last 50 to 70 years is modern, but in that context, anything is just a copy of Tolkien, because he's the one who created modern fantasy by taking all these classic myths and legends and stories from the Norse sagas and the Saxon Chronicles and all these other things, and taking these ideas and putting them into an epic tale that was fully constructed and fully realized. And from that point, that basic idea is any fantasy after that is using that.
Well,
but that's not a bad thing.
And Jordan was even pretty explicit in some of his, because he named things in reference to where he pulled a lot of stuff from, like Samael and Ishamael, and these biblical names that were associated with evil were forsaken, so that's the easiest example, I think, from that series. But yeah, I think my original thought was don't be a copycat, but I'm more in the use it if it works, the Bruce Lee mentality. Use it if it works. It doesn't matter where you get it from. Just give credit where credit's due if you're interviewed or whatever.
Yeah. And they'd already, or at least I hadn't seen anything from the creative team of the series, but from the executive team, from the business side of it, they had said they wanted their own Game of Thrones with Wheel of Time. The Netflix had said they wanted their own Game of Thrones with Witcher. So if you're already admitting that, and I mean, obviously you have to admit that because that's been the big thing in recent memory. Before that, it was the Lord of the Rings movies, and then it was the Game of Thrones series. So just say, yeah, we were inspired by this. We used some of these ideas but then we wanted to go this direction. So Jordan talked about that, of the ideas of where the chosen one thing, which I think I've complained about in previous episodes in relation to other things, but that can get really boring unless you do something different and interesting with it.
Which Robert Jordan did.
Which was his explanation of, taking these ideas of traditional fantasy, Tolkien fantasy, but then, having this idea to spin it off in this different direction. And Witcher does that really well by when you switch over to his story, to Geralt's story, the first thing you notice is he's not a typical hero. He's an anti-hero. He's a
Deadpool. He's a Deadpool versus a Superman.
Yes, he's original Deadpool, not what Deadpool became, which was kind of a meme and a joke. Which is what, if you know Deadpool from the movies, that's what is the jokester, the fourth wall breaking, and all of that. And originally, in his very first appearances, which I have somewhere, he was a mercenary. That he wasn't evil, but he wasn't a good guy. So he originally is a bad guy simply because he was hired by the bad guys, right? So it was that kind of a thing, and you see that with his story when it switches to that in The Witcher. But you also do see that he does have a conscience. He does have a code that he lives by, because there are certain things he won't do. So very quickly, rather than telling you, they show you who this guy is, which is really important if you're trying to pull in new eyeballs, because obviously you know that because you've played the games. Chuck knows that because he's played the games and read some of the literature. I don't know anything.
Well, which is one of the cool things about the game, is it actually lets you choose within parameters how good of a guy you are. Because ultimately the story is the same with the end result, because even, what they say, even Hitler loves his mother, right? So, you could be a total bad guy, but still have the end goal of helping Ciri through the whole thing. But every time you haggle with the people in town and stuff to pay for your bounties and stuff, which are part of the story and outside of the story, both, you can choose to give them a deal, stick to the standard price, or try to gouge them, and try to even use your special powers to gouge them.
Mm-hmm.
So you and that affects things down the road if you do that in either direction. So you can choose how good of a guy you are, how bad of a guy you are throughout the whole game.
Yeah, which I was like, I think Mass Effect 1, if it may not have been the first one to do that, but it was probably the most popular game to create that system. Which, you know, it's a shame that the series ended after 2 and they never finished it. At least in my mind. But I digress. You brought up Siri. I do think my only real criticism of Witcher is that season 1 is that I think her story is the weakest. Evidenced by the fact that when I watched it a second time, I found myself skipping through a lot of her scenes.
Well, I think part of that is because her story is just about to start. Mm-hmm. So if we're going to speculate into season 2, it's just about to start. If it's again like the game, which the events of the show would be before the events of Witcher 3, even though Witcher 3 had a lot of flashbacks. She's really not much of a developed person until she meets Geralt.
Yeah.
So that weak story is kind of a sign of an undeveloped person.
And they do help themselves by giving you a hook of mystery of what in the world is going on with this girl. What is this thing that's happening around her, with her and around her? Which I don't, they don't ever really explain. They kind of give you hints and ideas from one of the bad guys of when he kind of explains why he's after her. But they don't fully explain it, which I like. So it's not just like an exposition dump somewhere where we say, well, this is what's happening with you, and this is why you're important, and you know, this is the lore of where it came from. And
which again, in inverse of Wheel of Time, one of our big complaints about Wheel of Time is they're trying to establish too much too quick. Yeah. Whereas the whole point of the series, the first Witcher season was developing the relationship, ultimately the relationship between Geralt and Ciri. Other things along the way, Geralt and Yennefer and Yennefer's story and all of that, but the ultimate goal was Geralt and Ciri's relationship, why they had that, what they had.
You just made me realize something I hadn't thought of before, but with the complaint about Wheel of Time trying to do too much too quick, and I think, I don't know if they did this on purpose or not. I kind of think they did because of how obvious it is now that I've noticed it. Each storyline gives you something different about the world. So they're able to break up in smaller chunks, explaining, because this isn't like, you turn on a detective show, you watch classic Law and Order when it was good, and it's 1980s and 1990s New York City. You know what that is because you live in this world. We don't live in the world of Witcher, and especially if you haven't lived in it through the games, you really don't know what's going on. So with Ciri's storyline, they give you an idea about the politics and geography of the world. So they give you a little bit of an idea of that through what's going on with her storyline. Through Yennefer's storyline, they give you an idea of how magic works, which is always important, and always a bugaboo of mine. Is one of my complaints about Lord of the Rings is that Tolkien never explains you can get it if you read things like the Sumerian and some other things that are incredibly dense and difficult to read. You can get an idea of how magic works in that system. But if you're in a classical fantasy setting and there is some kind of magic, you have to figure out how that works, because
or at least what the rules of the game are.
Exactly.
Yeah, at least what the rules of the game are, because we can't have a true metaphysical explanation for the magic, because it's just not something that exists. But
magic.
If you give the parameters of the magic, which they do in Witcher, then which they don't do in Lord of the Rings, because it just sometimes Saruman can do this and sometimes Gandalf can do this, and then you'd wonder why they don't do that later in this other situation. And
I think that's partly because Tolkien wasn't explicit as C.S. Lewis, but to a certain degree he's doing an allegory of heaven and hell, of God and Satan. So the Gandalf type people are kind of like angels versus the bad guys who are demons, and so it's a little more nebulous there, because it's the allegory that's important. But if you're trying to pull someone into a fantasy world and make that world real, you need to know how it works, in the same way that everyone, even if they've never taken a physics class, everyone in the real world knows basic Newtonian physics, even if you can't explain, even if you can't tell someone what the Newton's 3 laws are, because you see them, you experience them, you know them. So you've got to be able to establish that. And that's one of our big complaints about Wheel of Time, is there's only one more episode left in the first season, and they have yet to explain how channeling, how weaving works.
But they did show some limitations of it, though, with her being tired and taking strength from the person you heal.
They have shown a little bit of the limitations of that, but not much, and it's very surface level, and I don't know how much of that you get if you don't know the source.
Here's my problem with this series, with the way they've taken just license to do whatever the hell they want anytime they want. They've shown us limitations to it, but when they want to make somebody badass later, I bet you those limitations don't show up.
And from the very beginning of Yennefer's story, you know how magic works. You know what its limitations are. You know how its practitioners manifest magical things.
And that actually ends up showing up later near the end, and you're like, oh, okay, so that's why they did it this way. And that's why they couldn't do that to whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you, and then with Henry Cavill, you show, obviously, first of all, with his storyline, you show the main character. You show him as an individual, but then you also get the Witchers and what those are and what that means. And then through him, you also show the monsters of the world, because again, this is a fantasy setting. If you get attacked by a wolf, I know what that is because I've seen wolves, right? So if you get attacked by this creepy thing with 4 arms, what the hell is that, right? So you get an idea that there are some of these, mythical fantasy monsters in this world, and they give you a little bit of an idea of how some of them work, and then what that means to the normal person. I think that's another important thing in a fantasy setting, that, like, again, I'm gonna try not to get too much on ranting on Wheel of Time, because we're gonna do that later, but
well, I think we can just go ahead and blend them together.
Yeah, they do a terrible job of explaining the Trollocs, and because the way you need to do that is you need to show what that means to the everyday person, as well as what that means to the non-everyday person like Lan and Moraine. So in the books, that's very clear, and that's one of the things that pulls you into the story. Is here you have these 2 people who are very experienced with firsthand knowledge, in fact, of what these things are and what they can do. But then you have the 2 Rivers kids who only know about these things from, bedtime story type things.
Which Yeah, which they don't even go into on kind of explaining what that even means
Mhm.
in this series.
And
We
right
still only
off,
got one glimpse of Ishamael,
yeah,
and I've got to assume he's going to be in the last episode.
one would hope, but we'll see. We'll
And
see
if
what they
he's
do
not,
there.
then why did we even get the glimpse of him?
Mhm. And right off the bat, with
Unless it wasn't even him, unless they're going straight to the dark one. But
I don't want to get too much into it, but right off the bat with Geralt's storyline, you find out uh, why there are professional monster hunters in this world,
yes, yes,
and what that means to the everyday villager, and with the little girl that he meets there, it in that first episode, in his first little story arc there, they also do it in an amusing way. They do it in an amusing way that ends in a way that is not so amusing, which is great because it again that's more setting the stage, but it's also uh, creating a link of sympathy or even empathy, depending on your life experiences, with Geralt. So it's
mm-hmm.
pulling you in, which is especially important since he's kind of an asshole. That
Mm-hmm.
to right off the bat get you to relate to this guy and understand where he's coming from, even if he is very rough around the edges sometimes.
Well, and when I first heard the casting, I just finished the game, and I didn't like Henry Cavill as Superman.
Mm-hmm.
So that was my only interaction there with him as an actor, and I was like, oh God, they're gonna ruin this, whatever. But I'll give it a shot. And then I kind of saw the news stories of how much of a nerd he was and how much he loved it, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, so maybe this will work out. But this will tie right into our Wheel of Time discussion because they explicitly made someone who look at him as Superman and look at him as Geralt, how he acts, how he does everything. They made him not only look similar enough, act similar enough, talk similar enough. I mean, it was exactly the same portrayal they put into the games, which, from what I hear, is exactly the same as it should. But we'll get confirmation on that. Should
Mm-hmm.
be how it was described in the books. They wanted the actual fan to connect to Geralt
Mm-hmm.
as he was in those books and series, and then make the show good enough that it pulls a new audience in. That's the difference.
Do you have that picture handy that you sent me? Can
Yeah,
you pull that up?
I have it. I have it queued up. So this will probably be the thumbnail
Uh-huh.
for this episode, and I'll find a funny one for the next one. But this, when we're talking about, we're bitching about Wheel of Time.
Uh-huh.
One of the things is Rafe was such a big fan. This is what a real fan does.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about a guy who is an actor on the set
Yeah.
saying, no, we got to do it this way. And I'm not even going to do it if you don't do it this way. Versus the guy
Yep.
who wrote the adaptation, who has all the power in the room, deviating from the story.
Yeah. And if you know anything about the filming of Lord of the Rings, this was a major thing that contributed to its success. Christopher Lee, besides being a legitimate real world badass, do you know anything about Christopher Lee's history?
No.
Uh, he was, I don't think he was SAS, but it was something different. It was in World War II, he was part of something that was colloquially called the Department of Dirty Tricks. So he was a spec ops guy in World War II. And then he goes on to be an incredible actor in a ludicrous number of films, including some really iconic ones. But he's also a skilled sword fighter. He did a metal album, and he's a freaking scholar, like a legitimate scholar when it comes to Tolkien and not just the Lord of the Rings books, but really all of Tolkien's works. And so he would routinely put his 2 cents in and kind of push the story to make sure it was more faithful to the setting, as well as coming up with ideas of how to bring in that richness of work that they had as their foundation of even from things like the Silmarillion and the Unfinished Tales and some other things. And he would tell Peter Jackson of, well, we should incorporate this here, or he would be more like this because of this, and so he was a major component to that. And Jackson was open to that because he himself had before working on the script and before trying to sell it to New Line Cinema, he himself had dived into this work. And so he had a great respect as well as a great understanding for the foundation that created these films. And I think that's what makes Witcher works so well, is you clearly have people here, including the lead actor, who know the works. I mean, he's citing pages from books.
Well, and you also got a lead actor that got wind of the project and sought the project out.
Yes, I'd forgotten about that.
Yeah. So and you look at the difference with Wheel of Time. Theoretically, that's what the showrunner did, but at the same time, I'm starting to doubt it a lot. But they got this fresh new cast to introduce you to these new people, and the old Star Wars model, right? Nobody knows who Mark Hamill is. Nobody knows who.
Yeah.
All. So it's just I don't know. These young actors and actresses, they're going to do whatever they're told and how they're told to do it, because this is their big shot right now. They're not going to rock the boat. Whereas someone who's established that sought the project out is more likely to do that. And if you're going to make the next Game of Thrones or the next Lord of the Rings, you need that person that's going to have authority on the set too. It's hiring the star quarterback. You do it for a reason.
I'm gonna go get a drink refill, so let's pause quick here. And while we're doing that, I want you to think about the point I'm about to make, which is Henry Cavill is a great example.
Is it Cavill or Cavill? I've heard Cavill.
I've heard Cavill, so I have no idea. I've never heard a Brit say it, so I should probably find a Brit to listen to because he is British. But he's a great example of the negative consequences of wokeness in Hollywood.
Okay, so what do you want me to think specifically about?
About just that idea of wokeness and toxic masculinity.
Okay. All right, we took a refill and potty break. And we're about to this will be officially into our Wheel of Time section, even though it's been kind of interwoven in the Witcher discussion, and we'll continue talking Witcher as we go. Yeah. But since it's official Wheel of Time section and you just poured a drink, we'll go from there.
Buckle up, kids. We're going in dry. All right. So not that long ago, Henry Cavill, now you've got me wondering, because I've never heard it that way, but he would have been the next big thing. He should have been the next big thing, right? He is an iconic, a classic leading man. He's tall. He's a muscular, manly man.
Got the butt chin.
He's got the strong chin. He's got the look. He's got very good natural charisma, just on the screen, even in things that I didn't like. I liked him in it, or thought he did a good job, even if I thought his direction and writing was terrible. And in interviews, you can see that natural charisma. but he's like The Rock, but he can also really act. I mean, legitimately a quality actor.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me think that, well, we don't want that anymore here. We're beyond that. That's toxic masculinity. We don't want to notice that. We don't want to push that.
Well, except that there is still the consumer that does. He was Superman. And Witcher is not only successful, but it's in high demand for more seasons. So what else has he been in that was popular?
I mean, those are the two big ones, was the Snyderverse and then now Witcher. And that's kind of my point, is he should be like, Tom Cruise, but not a midget, where every year, every couple of years, it's, oh, hey, the new Henry Cavill movie is coming out, and that's kind of how big name people, the big leading men are. Is it's not, this movie X title is coming out, that movie looks interesting. It's, oh, hey, the new Denzel Washington movie is coming out. And it, like, what the movie is almost secondary, because he's great and he's likable and well known. And Denzel Washington is a good example of that, because he started in the era where toxic masculinity wasn't so ubiquitous and well established, and so he's carried over. And I feel like the iconic leading men of nowadays, that's who they are. Is they're all middle-aged actors who started out as young hot dudes who were the new leading men, taking over from the John Waynes or whatever of years before. Because if you think about the leading men of now, they're not really that. Like Jake Gyllenhaal, can you imagine him as a leading man in the 60s, 70s, or even 80s? It's not the same thing.
No, not really at all. I mean, are there any, or they're not even really making movies like that anymore, I guess. So it's kind of hard to.
That's part of the thing. And that's one of the things I like about Witcher, is they don't weaken Geralt to boost Yennefer.
No. In fact, that they did a good job of saying they're both badass, but differently
in these ways. He has his thing, and I think that kind of later story with the werewolf kind of thing, that's what I thought of it as, because that's kind of how they set it up, and turns out to be very different from your expectations if you don't know the source material. And you're thinking, oh, it's going to be like this because this is what I know. And that's interesting.
Which in Witcher 3, the game, there was a similar storyline mission thing that you did. So it was like, they kind of, even though the timeline was before the one I played, they did insert a lot of the things that were in that one. And I don't know if it was because they hodgepodge the games with the books.
Yeah.
Again, that's why we're going to get Chuck in on this. I don't know if they hodgepodge the games and then the series is more in line or what,
but he is a manly man, and the character is a manly man. But yet this goes back to where we kind of started of
what's the bard's name in the show? In the game, it's Dandelion.
Yeah,
but I'm assuming that's a nickname for the actual name of the guy. But the whole Witcher 3, you know him as Dandelion. He shows the effeminate male, which they did a good job of casting in the show.
And they don't feel the need to add those character traits to Geralt to make him less toxically masculine. He is who he is. He's standing up in that particular storyline, which I won't go too into because I think it's great. And if anyone hasn't watched it, I don't want to spoil anything, but he's going up against a monster that he is told he cannot survive against. And he's not entirely sure he can survive against, but he does it. He goes up against it solo to get the job done, to keep anyone else from harm, and
simply because he gave his word.
Yeah, and in that's actually a really good point of
there's a difference between goodness and honor.
And honor is a big effing deal when it comes to positive masculine traits that were a huge part of storytelling in the past that you don't really see anymore, because the man whose word is his bond has somehow gotten wrapped up into toxic masculinity as well. And it's no, a toxic man is an asshole, is the kind of guy who, if his neighbor or even his friend found out that he was toxic and that he was abusing his wife, would get punched in the face repeatedly by the actual man, right? And that's the negative side of these woke concepts taking over the storytellers, because we have missed out on what could have been several Witchers, right? That Henry Cavill or guys like him could have had a number of these kinds of stories, and they're kind of few and far between now.
Well, it's there. I just saw a thing on South Korean cinema, which is becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. But the male roles in them are quite a bit effeminate compared to what we're used to from 80s and 90s and action movies and stuff. And China is banning Korean cinema in China because they do not want to emasculate their men to a certain degree. They want their men to be manly, and South Korean men are they say that South Korea, it would be the what was the thing at Oklahoma State? OU, where the girls are girls and the guys are too, right? Yeah, just like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's the difference. And our Hollywood is more in tune with South Korean Hollywood than the is going down that direction anyways. No longer are the days of Clint Eastwood and
Clint Eastwood is a great example of that too, because like I brought up Denzel Washington earlier, and he's an iconic leading man. He's a manly man, but manly man doesn't have to mean Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone, which was kind of the trope of the 80s, was the muscle-bound action hero. But that's a very surface level manly man. That's not what made them manly men. It was what they were doing and how they were acting. Right? You did take the first Rocky movie, which was a really quality dramatic movie, and it wasn't that he was a big, 5'6", big buff boxer heavyweight that made him a manly man. It was that he had his shot, and he knew he didn't have a prayer of winning, but he was going to go in there, give it his all, and refuse to go down. He was going to push and push, no matter how much it hurt, to take it to the decision, because that's what a man does.
Not only in the fight, but in the training to get there.
Yeah.
And in fact, when he strayed away from that, which would be Rocky 3, is when he started going downhill.
Yeah. And then he went back to it in Rocky 4, which is how he single-handedly defeated communism. It's a great documentary. If you haven't watched Rocky 4, it's a great documentary on how the USSR felt.
Yeah. Well, even in Rocky 3, he gets Apollo Creed as the big brother when he lost his father figure, who was Mickey.
Yep.
And so, and we're both fathers, and we both have sons. And sometimes I look down like Mickey would have at Rocky and be like, "What are you doing?" What are you doing?
Here, chase this chicken.
Here's a shovel. Let's do some work. But let's tie this into the wheel of time.
If I must.
If we must. Well, okay, so we talked about the main character and how they made it a point to make him what he was supposed to be, no matter who the actor was, right? Because originally I couldn't see it, but then after seeing it, I can't unsee it, you know, because they went out of their way, including the actor, went out of their way to do that. So we got a commenter on one of our videos, and he says, the thing that annoys me about Tom is I can't believe they couldn't find a flamboyant British stage actor who loves the sound of his own voice. I can't believe it either. That's exactly what we're talking about.
That is a great freaking point.
Yeah, I'm gonna like his comment and tell him he was starred in this episode as well. But I don't know if we should name him by name. I don't know what the etiquette is on these things. I mean, I don't think
it's a public comment. So
Chewy Whale is his.
Oh, that's delightful. If somebody sent us a direct message or an email, then I'm not gonna.
Okay, so if it's public comment, we can go ahead and name him.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
Chewy Whale.
Chewy Whale, you are a pithy genius.
Yes.
Okay, so delightful comment.
It is a delightful comment, and that's part of the reason why we're just throwing our hands up and going, why, on a lot of this casting stuff. But as if there was, there wasn't a guide or anybody's thoughts on this pre-series talk that happens to not be alive right now. Because you hear a lot of, it's what Jordan would have wanted. It's easy to say about someone who can't speak up for themselves. Well, we actually know to some degree what Jordan would have wanted because he was asked on occasion, and he has notes on this. And I'm going to go back to 2014. Oh, I guess I need to share screen.
He would always do, Q&As when he would talk or do a book signing. And so a lot of the forums and groups early on were about, stuff that he said. I asked Jordan this question when I was getting my book signed, and this is what he said.
Yeah, so let's go back into 2014, and people would ask him if there was a movie or if there was a show, who would he cast for these things, and he actually gave answers. Let me bring that down. Okay, so again, source material 2014. We got a nice long list here. And
go scroll back up a little bit to that second paragraph. RJ's notes tell us what? That the fan may have asked the wrong question as they give us insight into models he may have used for some of the characters. That's more interesting to me. Because so now we have to assume something. We have to, or at least speculate something. Is this who he had in mind when he wrote the descriptions of the characters, or did he write the descriptions and then say this person would be perfect when he saw them on screen? That's hurtful. Younger readers may need to Google images of a few of these. Shut up.
Well, some of these are even older. Some of these are even before our time.
Audrey Hepburn at age 18. I love Audrey Hepburn. She is one of the classic leading ladies.
So I found this by proxy of another source. It was a Redditor that actually did the pictures with the names. And so we'll go through the list here. Now,
wow.
Ben Affleck is Randall Thor. You know my opinions on
picture.
You know my opinions on Ben Affleck. I think he's ruined everything he's ever done. But at the same time, let's go to the current version. They actually kind of did that.
I think he's gotten better as he's gotten older, and I have heard some people talking and showing evidence that a lot of that is because he was an alcoholic, that he's gotten sober as he's gotten older.
That may be. I will reserve judgment then, but
because
I think he ruined Batman. He ruined Daredevil.
He couldn't handle the fame in his younger years.
Well, that's because he just kept riding Matt Damon's coattails, but that's my opinion.
bottom left there, Gwen Alver is awesome. Where in the heck did they get that Patrick Stewart picture?
Yeah. Okay. So this is what made me think about this, because he brought up the, and I said I'm gonna answer this guy. It'd be like, well, Robert Jordan thought the same thing, even though it wasn't exactly, he had someone in mind. But yeah, Patrick Stewart with hair. Yeah, there we go. Paid and Fane is Alan Rickman, which people who have read the series, if you just read the first couple of books, you're going to be like, no, not at all. But then when you read when he becomes kind of regal and full of himself,
I love
then
Alan
you can see the
Rickman.
range. Yeah.
I love Alan Rickman's story too, because he didn't start acting until he was like 40. He was like an accountant or something bizarre like that. He had an incredibly ordinary life, but acting was a dream of his youth. And he kind of had a midlife crisis, except it wasn't a crisis because he turned it into something else. He said, you know what? I am going to pursue this thing that I've always wanted to do and I've never done. And he became a huge star.
Well, this is where I hate to be negative Nancy here, but it was a midlife crisis. It just he happens to be one of the successful
that's
conversions out of it.
That's true. That's
many people do the same thing and end up not where he got.
So, who is Nynaeve there? I don't know that person.
Is young
Jacqueline Bisset. Okay.
Yeah. Who's Min? Isabella Rossellini.
Okay, I know that name, but that's
an old, definitely
on a younger picture because again, part of the point that we've ranted about, like something we'll go into again here is, look, we're clearly not prudes. You definitely, if you've watched any of our videos where we talk about sexualness things, but in the very first episode, Rand and Egwene going at it, besides the fact that I'm looking at this picture of Ben Affleck going at it with Audrey Hepburn, it makes me want to throw up because he's a twit and she's awesome. Anyway, but the annoyance at them going at it in the first episode is clearly not because we're prudes. It's because these are supposed to be kids just barely turning into young adults.
Well, and again, the difference
very innocent.
And the difference in development is the males would have been older. So it would have been like an 18 or 19-year-old boy and a 16-year-old girl.
Well, that's why someone like Audrey Hepburn is such a great choice. Besides the fact she was a phenomenal actress, is she's one of those people who always looked a lot younger than she was.
Yeah. Well, and you're going to get that with actors where it's like, just convincing us these were teenagers when you look back at 80s movies of high school, 16 Candles and all that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the next part. I'm not familiar with the person he has for Elaine here. That's Nicole Kidman? Holy hell. She looks completely different there. Yeah. Okay, yeah, I can understand Nicole Kidman, but that picture is not very flattering. So whoever put this together, boo.
Well, because it says Nicole Kidman at age 18, so this person went out and found pictures of these people when they were very young.
Well, and it does say she has curly locks. So
yeah. Yep.
Now Morghese. Yeah.
We have not met these people. For anyone who hasn't read the series,
we should have. We should
have. I thought we were going to. We did not.
Avienda, I approve. Fail. That's Cher, by the way. For those that are looking at the real Perrin's wife. I'm not familiar with Berylane. I'm not even sure we're going to meet her in the series, so I guess it's not even that important. Swan, little Renee Zellweger. That's not too bad.
Yeah, younger Renee Zellweger, which that's definitely not who I envisioned, but
it's not who I did either, but
I can see it simply because of her acting chops, because as we ranted about in the previous episode, the main thing I didn't like about Swan. Actually, I may not have mentioned this. She's supposed to be a pretty petite woman, not to the
Mm-hmm.
extreme that Moiraine is. Moiraine is
Or
it is
or
repeatedly commented on how short she is.
or we'll get in a second. Tuan, she was supposed
Yeah,
to be
but
tiny, tiny, tiny. Yeah.
um, but Swan is a fairly diminutive woman, and yet she seems bigger than she is because she has the ability to look at you in such an imposing way that she makes you feel small.
Mm-hmm. Baron, I'm not familiar with that actress. Looks kind of similar to how I would have envisioned. I would have said a pointier nose, but uh, not being familiar with the actress, I don't know how she acts in her or what parts she's played.
Yeah, who? Which
Varen, right
she
here.
looks familiar.
Margaret Rutherford.
I don't know the name, so she's probably a character actress type person who's done a lot of British stuff
Mm-hmm.
that I've seen.
Lanfear looks good. Catherine Deneuve. Have you
Don't know that name.
now Birgitte, the German pronunciation of Bridget? That is exactly who I envisioned when I read the books.
Mm-hmm.
Except put blonde hair on it.
Oh, it's back to my rant about the wokeness of the leading man. She is how you create a strong woman
Mm-hmm.
and make it really believable.
Mm-hmm. Well,
You know?
her and this gal right here.
Yep. Make it really believable
Mm-hmm.
and make it in a way that is not diminishing the male characters, which is the I think biggest problem right now in this push for strong female characters is that because all of these people now live in Wokistan, they are so bathed in these irrational anti-science, anti-history, anti-logic ideas that they can't see any way to make a strong female character except by stepping on a man. You have
Mm-hmm.
to diminish the male characters. It's one of the things that's so great we just said about Witcher is they don't diminish Geralt in order to raise oh man, I love that of John Wayne is here at the
Mm-hmm.
front. They don't diminish Geralt in order to raise Yennefer. They raise them both in different ways so that they are both fully realized characters and strong in their own right. One of the classic examples of strong, especially in the modern sense, strong female characters is Alien. Is Ripley, Sigourney Weaver in the first Alien movie. I feel like I can spoil a movie that's like 40 years old at this point.
Yeah,
But
we can do that.
yeah. um, Tom Skerritt was the name of the guy who was the captain of the ship of the that they were on. And he was a big name, a big name in the late 70s when that movie came out. And so, and even on the posters, he was more prominent. And that was done on purpose because he dies halfway through the movie, maybe a little less than halfway. Um, and Ridley Scott wanted to shock the crap out of the audience. Sigourney Weaver was not a big name,
Mm-hmm.
right? So he is a manly man doing manly things. He dies because he puts himself in danger so that he doesn't have to put his crew in danger, because he's the captain, he's the man, and he's going to do this. Ripley, Sigourney Weaver's character, becomes an incredibly strong female lead because of what she does, not because of what someone else doesn't do.
Mm-hmm.
and you brought up the point with the pillow talk lesbian sexy time, that aren't you people who either are part of this community or are an ally of this community? Aren't you tired of being patronized? How is it not patronizing that you can't be strong unless you push someone else down?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have what it takes to exceed on your own. You have to push someone else down.
Which brings us right to the opening scene of episode 7.
We haven't talked about this yet. I'm really curious what you're going to say.
Okay, so remember I compared the MCU to Daredevil and the struggles, and okay, so I understand the IEL are badass, and he makes it a point in the books to explain how badass the women are as well in this fighting situation. But we got to take everything in context. So this is huge spoiler alert for the books and the show.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I guess it's not.
I'll give you some jazz hands when we come out of spoiler territory.
Okay. So first of all, it starts with single pregnant female warrior, this is part of the books. This is not dramatized at this point. She insisted on fighting up until the end of the pregnancy and everything. But we got single female warrior pregnant and a bunch of dudes attacking her with swords at various points in time in this little sequence. And she is completely badassery, Scarlett Johansson in Black Widow, all over the place, doing all kinds of stuff, and kills all these dudes and eventually gets stabbed by one of them. What is it, like the 7th one of them at some point?
No, it wasn't that many. That was
because there was one initially, and then there was another, and then there was 2.
So there was 3 at one time.
Three at one time. So at least 5. At least 5. And then she kills that one, and then goes down to give birth, which is what happens in the books, but not the everything we just talked about, just on that mountain giving birth. And so here's the thing. It was this immense action sequence with her being badass with her spears and showing off how badass the female IEO were. But she's obviously 9+ months pregnant. And these weren't just foot soldiers. This is my problem. These were the freaking golden bees. Yeah. These were the special forces of those units.
They were the elite guard, the Varangian guard, the immortals of Persia, if you know any of these things from history.
So when you really take everything into context, they were the equivalent of the IEO in battle, because they were the most badass, what we'd call Westerners on that map. Mm-hmm. And so this one 9 months pregnant female is taking out 5 of these dudes, where 3 of them at once, when they're the special forces of this. So it bothered me on so many levels. I mean, it's actually one of those bothered me that you come to expect from a show, because they tend to overdo that kind of stuff. Like you brought up with Black Widow fighting like a man. But at the same time, it could have been done so much better and still been film adaptable. That's the major excuse.
Jazz hands. We're done spoilering book things. So it's interesting that you say that, because one of my first note was that I actually liked the opening scene, and then it kept going. So I've
if it had been 1 or 2.
I mentioned this as an analogy in the past, complaining about what I just said, is that to make a female character strong, you have to push down, you have to step on the heads of men. That's the only way they can succeed. So that first guy that she dispatches, here's a woman. She's injured. Something's wrong with her. She's not at 100%, obviously. He comes rushing in overconfident. She dodges his strike and grabs his cloak and uses the full weight of her body to pull him back and pull him down. So the analogy I've used in the past is go watch the fight scene with Black Widow when she's first introduced in Iron Man 2 versus the most recent outing of her own movie. And she's just in the most recent movie, she's just manhandling and beating the crap out of large male stuntmen. Okay. This would be like Ronda Rousey getting in the ring with Randy Couture. Okay. Ronda Rousey was the pinnacle of female mixed martial artists. If she stepped in the ring with Randy Couture, she would be down in 3 seconds. That's not sexist. That's a fact, right? I'm not just whistling Dixie here. Okay.
Well, and if you want to make it not sexist, it's also about weight classes. You know, I fought at 170. I would get, I rolled with a guy that was a 205er. So he was about 215, 220, a lot when I was in San Antonio. And I remember putting him in a perfect armbar one time. It was immaculate. I had everything in place. I had it locked. And you know how he got out of it? He stood up and did a curl. So this is me on his arm, and he went whoop, and then slammed me on my head. Luckily, we were on the nice thick practice mats. That's how he got out of it. He stood up and did a curl.
Yeah.
That's why we have weight classes. So if we want to even just take gender out of it,
yeah,
this is probably, if she's an athletic female, and I'm not okay. So I'm not gonna say what's special about her that would give away parts of the books. That's not as tall as other IEL. So she's probably about 5'5", 5'6" to be a taller
average
Western
woman.
Well, taller than average Western.
Yeah,
female.
but even an average woman is going to be I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, but average woman is like 5'5", 5'6". Average man is like 5'10". And then they
see they're actually lower than you think. Average woman's around 5'4", 5'5". Average male's 5'9.5".
I thought it was a little more than that. But then I think the average
in the US,
I think the average man outweighs the average woman by like 30 pounds or 40 pounds.
About 40 pounds. Yeah.
It's a lot. And now factor in, we're not talking average, we're talking the pinnacle of the physically fit. And so that not only is it breaking the bounds of reasonableness, not only is it taking me out of so when you're watching something that's fantasy, whether it's, fantasy with, dragons and magic and that kind of fantasy, or just the fact that it's a movie, so it's not real life, there's a certain level of suspension of disbelief because this isn't the real world, right? Well, you take me out of that when you have somebody that is 40 pounds lighter than the person they are fighting. Again, take the gender out of it, just 40 pounds lighter. They can't just beat the crap out of these people. So go watch that first Black Widow fight, which is, and not only is it the suspension of disbelief, it's just the entertainment value. That first Black Widow fight in Iron Man 2 is incredibly entertaining because they are forced to be creative because they are working in the world of as real as possible, even though we're in a fantasy setting. So as real as possible, how would someone with marvelous breasts, who's like 120 pounds max, take out this professional security guard who's 180 to 200? Okay, well, now we got to get creative in the way that she moves, in the way that she uses their momentum against them, which was why I thought that very first scene was really cool, because she's not overpowering the person who outweighs her by 40, 50 pounds. She's using his momentum against him. She's being cunning. She's being the better fighter, not the stronger fighter.
But it was just it was the fact that, okay, so I've trained lots of pregnant women in my life, and okay, so
I stay away from that.
let's assume that she was that badass before she was being pregnant. The diminishing returns on your physical prowess become very great in those last few months. The decline in performance is quite substantial in the most well-meaning and most motivated of people. This would have been better served to have her with a group of her peers fighting to the end with this elite group of people, and
she's the last one standing.
And not even that is maybe she's not the last one standing, but the last one standing is the one who approached her later after he defeated one of her comrades, but then noticed that she was.
Oh, that would have been awesome, because then you would have elevated that character because he's the last one standing.
And you would have and you would have exemplified. You could have showed him in action to exemplify why he had the mark on his sword,
which they still haven't explained.
Yeah. So you could have built him up. You could have made it more realistic. You could have still showed badassery, because you could have had healthy versions of the people that were supposed to be fighting.
The spear maidens.
Yeah. And actually they actually described in the books worked together well, which was why they were badass. And you could have showed some of that.
It is one of the many ways that Jordan portrays gender roles so brilliantly and engaging in a literary sense, is because the shield maidens in their talking with each other belittle their male counterparts, because their male counterparts are just, I'm the stronger, better fighter and I'm going to win, and they're more cunning because they have to be, because they're physically weaker, but they have to be more cunning. They fight like a wolf pack. Okay, if you've ever watched a wolf pack bring down a large beast, there's some cool video. I forget. One of my ways to unwind and try and turn my brain off is when I'm laying in bed getting ready to go to sleep. I'll try and find a nature documentary to watch, because I really like them, and because it's something I can turn off in the middle of, and I don't feel the need to keep watching and keep thinking. So I don't remember the one I watched recently that was a small pack in, I think, Wyoming, taking down a bison. Okay, so even the largest wolves, even a Rocky Mountain timber wolf, the big ones, that's like 160-pound dog, maybe.
It's a big dog.
That's a big dog. That is a really big dog. Compared to a bison, which can weigh as much as a car, and be as big as a car. Okay, you can't go at it like, I mean, just think about two male bison butting heads to show who's the strongest. A wolf's not gonna do that. It's got to be strong. It's got to be cunning. It's got to work in a pack to snap at the hind legs. And then when that bison whirls, you back off, and the other, pack mate comes in from the other side, snaps at its leg, trying to hamstring it. That's how it's an interesting and exciting thing to watch. And then when you translate that down to the human, it becomes an interesting thing to read or watch, because you're creating something more than just the stereotypical 1900s boxers just standing in the middle of the ring punching each other in the face, which was we think of as boring in the here and now. Well, now imagine how boring and unbelievable it would be if one was a heavyweight and one was a middleweight.
Well, and we're talking about a complex thing, which is fighting. So anybody who's ever fought or knows anything about combat, hand-to-hand weapons, or any of that, it's very complex. So you can kind of hide some things in that, but when you really break it down to how they're doing it, it would be more like arm wrestling. You try to overcomplicate fighting to be about style and this technique beats everything, which is not true. the average person that doesn't know what they're looking at can say, oh, okay, I can follow that. But it's more like arm wrestling. If we just went across the table, grabbed hands, and who could push the other down, there's eventually going to be a point where the bell curves do not overlap anymore. And that's more like what they're doing right now, because they're trying to make it all the same.
So we could dwell on this forever, but I want to, one of my first notes here is, all right, so I brought up Cowboy Bebop previously, and
I think you told me, but I don't think you brought it up here.
No, I briefly mentioned it, I think in one of our last episodes. And I brought up Cowboy Bebop, and it was canceled 3 weeks after it was went live on Netflix, which was just ludicrously fast. And there's a lot of Schadenfreude going on out there with the fans of the original. I don't want to get too deep into that, but one of the first things that people said, hey, wait a minute, and started commenting on and eventually complaining about was the female character, because there are 3 main characters, 4 kind of eventually. There are 3 main characters, and one of them is a woman. And I know you've seen it, but you weren't like a fan, so you probably don't remember Faye Valentine. So I can't share screen.
Oh, hold on. I can help you with that. There you go.
All right, so this is Faye Valentine in the animated series. Sam, what are some of the first things you notice about this character?
I mean, I need to take a break, but
left and right, are those the first 2 things you notice?
No, it was actually the clothing itself, the overall ensemble, but
yeah, so exactly. So the overall ensemble, for 2 reasons. The most obvious one being how revealing it is. The second one being how stupidly impractical it is, because this is something animated. This isn't something a real person has to wear. So here is the actress in the live action adaptation. All right. So what do you notice about that?
Very Indiana Jones-ish.
Yep. Now, I show that for a couple of reasons. So here's the thing, and I'll try and tie it into what we're talking about here with that opening.
Please do, because I'm not seeing where it goes.
You're not following. Okay, so one of the turning points with not only fans but just casual observers that made them think, oh, so that's the direction we're going here, is there's a very logical explanation for why you would do that. Just simply say, hey, we understand this is how Faye looks in the animated series, but that's simply not a practical thing to make for a real human to wear. So she's going to look very different in the live action. They didn't say that. They basically said the male gaze is evil, and we're going to have real women making this costume for a real woman to wear. All right. Why are you living in Wokistan? Because how hard would it have been to simply say, hey, it's a practical thing. Things aren't going to look the same. We're going to be as true to the style as we can be, but we can't just mimic it. And the reason
they did that in a previous movie where they actually explained it the way you said would have been right. Remember X-Men? When they gave them their uniforms instead of Wolverine wearing his yellow and black and everything.
What would you prefer, a yellow spandex?
Yeah, but they actually said that would have been kind of ludicrous for the environment we were portraying. So
it just wouldn't have translated onto real life,
onto a dramatic screen depiction of this.
It wouldn't have made as much sense, as well as simply the impracticality of trying to make a costume that looked like this article of clothing. But they didn't do that. They said male gaze bad. But there was a practical character reason why Faye dresses like that, because when you first meet her in the series, she's kind of an airheaded sexpot who uses the male gaze against the male. Okay. Then she develops and you realize, oh, she's not an airhead. She's rather cunning. And then she develops more into, she's not just cunning, she's kind of a cutthroat bitch, into, oh, I have sympathy for her now because I see how she got that way.
Mhm.
Okay. So they killed all of that by taking away the sexuality of the character in the live action. So my point is, there's a real world reason why the Aiel look the way they do. And this jumped out at me, and I didn't mention it when we were talking about Tom and his introduction in that episode is, Sam, why are the Aiel wearing white? So I don't think this is really a spoiler, but I would describe the Aiel in the books as Irish ninjas. So they're all their hair is all some shade of red or blonde. Their eyes are all some shade of blue or green. And yet, because of the harsh climate in which they live, they dress in. They're also a very martial culture. There's a lot of inspiration from Sparta that comes from them, and some other martial cultures.
The big inspiration, according to Jordan, out of his own mouth, was the Zulu.
Yeah. So they're a warrior nation. They're a warrior.
And he also
culture.
did bring up some Native American cultures too.
Yeah.
So,
and I can't remember off the top of my head because it's been so long since I read the books, but I do remember, from what little I know of Native American history and cultures, noticing that in their tribal nature. There's also a lot of references to the tribes of Israel there too, who also fought against each other.
Which is the problem of how do you do the diversity, because he did mix and match a lot of these things.
So the only thing I can think is the reason they're wearing white is because they're a desert people. So clearly they're Bedouin. There is a little bit of that is also drawn in, although there are other cultures that have the guest right, I guess you would call it. I think Norse culture was big on this too, of guests being shown hospitality.
Now, are you saying wearing white in the show or the book?
Wearing white in the show, because they wear shades of brown and mostly brown
and
like
gray.
Brown and gray, which, because it blends into, it's basically camouflage. They're not walking around.
Well, so my initial thought was the opening scene is in the snow. And they are an intelligent people. They're not just savages, right?
And they do reference that in the book as they start adding different colors as they go. But again, we saw this outside of the Blood Snows in that Tom episode where he was dressed the same way.
True. Okay. Yeah.
So where I'm going with this is there are good, legitimate, practical reasons to change something from an established IP to something different to translate it to the big screen. Why in the world would you change this? What is the point of changing this? This isn't grumpy old nerd ranting because it's not like it's in the book. My point is, why would you make a change that doesn't need to be made? You know, if you want to replicate what was shown in the books of them when they entered this new climate, starting to add different colors to their clothing so they could be blend in and be camouflage, versus the classic, European model of we have brightly colored clothes because we're not hiding, we're just mashing together, and we want to be able to tell friend from foe, which is where those colorful uniforms come from.
Well, let's circle back to the Swan and Moraine episode. Why? You didn't need it. It wasn't there. There's plenty of freaking sexuality in the Wheel of Time. There's taboo sexuality in the Wheel of Time. There's polyamory. There's homosexuality. There is every little. There's even a trans person.
Taboo from the real world, but also it's nuanced, and it's well written in the books, because in some places in the fantasy world it's taboo, but in some places it's not.
Mm-hmm. But even still, in that scene, it wasn't even necessary. You could have established that they were old friends, but and the whole other part was a facade without adding that. In fact, it just was 4 minutes of screen time that you could have better used to tell more story that you say you don't have time to tell.
You added something that was unnecessary, and you did it badly.
Oh yeah, it wasn't even convincing.
Yeah, it was incredibly cringeworthy. So my concern, and the thing that just jumped out at me with the way that Aiel are dressed is why did you feel the need to make changes that weren't necessary from a practical standpoint, like with the Faye Valentine character in the Cowboy Bebop live adaptation, and also weren't necessary? I mean, hell, I can't even think of a reason to make that change for reasons of Wokistan. The only thing I can think is, because you're a desert people, so they should look like Bedouins.
No, I don't think that's it. I think they wanted you to know right away she was Aiel, and they only have one other example of that in the one in the cage.
But you could have shown him with the classic dress, and Tom even mentioned the veil is they wear head wraps that they pull up.
I'm just saying that's probably the explanation. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. That's the explanation.
It's bizarre to me.
Because they do talk, he does talk about it in interviews, as he wants to show cultural continuity between places, even though he went way all over the place in actual physical genetic continuity within places. Which, if you're I'm as liberal as they come when it comes to a lot of things, but I also like the world to make sense when it comes to the biology of it. And when we were talking continuity, so the two rivers, they're like, oh, it's a diverse place. I'm like, how can it be? It can't even be. Your next living relative is going to be a third cousin. Mm-hmm. I mean, the furthest living relative is you're going to marry your second and third cousins in a place like that. Yeah. The genetic continuity after 1,000 years is going to be zero. You're going to be lucky you don't have birth defects coming out of this.
Yeah, so everyone's going to look like Prince Charles. Sorry.
Well, the closest modern example, and again, consider that this is modern, so they actually have access to the outside world, is Iceland. Yeah. And the average distance between family distance between married couples and people making children is third cousins.
Yep. So now imagine Iceland, but without modern travel. Heck, imagine Iceland even before modern travel, even before the age of sail, where at least sea transport became relatively easier.
But now just search up Icelandic people in your images, and you're going to not get a whole lot of variety coming down. Now the women are beautiful, but they're all the same beautiful. It's like looking at a catalog model. It's just it's going to be the same. Now we spent a lot of time on the first 2 minutes of this episode.
Yep. Well, I do think that's because it's rather.
It's probably the most important 2 minutes of the episode.
Really. And I was alluding to this earlier when we were talking about Witcher, but the next note I have is don't make Lan Worf. So for anyone who is not familiar with Star Trek: The Next Generation,
it wasn't even a big thing for me, but I know exactly what you're talking
exactly.
about. Yeah.
So Worf, there are memes of Worf and like gifs of just repeated loops of Worf from Star Trek Next Generation getting the crap kicked out of him, because what they did is they wanted to establish Worf as this incredibly strong and powerful physical character. Well, but that meant that every time they encountered something that they wanted to show was strong and powerful, they had it beat the crap out of Worf. So he just gets thrown around like a rag doll. Well, the next scene is so have they explained, because we know what we're looking at because we know the backstory, but have they explained about warders and channelers and creatures of the dark?
How they can feel them?
They kind of show that sort of in a few instances. They show it in the very first episode.
Except he okay, so this is my biggest beef on Lan the whole series, and this is throughout this episode. He is constantly surprised by things.
Exactly. So you even if you don't know that's what's going on, the actor does a good job of portraying that he senses something's not right.
No, he said I know something's following us.
Well, that was earlier, but I think that was something different. Someone different. But then
that wasn't the Trolloc that attacked them.
I think that was the guy who comes walking out and you only see him from the back.
Yeah, well, okay, so that was my initial thought, and then the Trolloc comes out, because if you're making that assumption, you have to assume he didn't feel the Trolloc.
Yeah. So when he's on watch there, he senses something. You can tell he's uneasy. He feels like something or someone is out there, and yet he's still surprised because you wanted this moment of somebody channeling to knock the Trolloc off into the abyss. You couldn't have had 5 seconds before that of a Trolloc jumping out on the other end of the camp, like at Nynaeve or Perrin or something, and then flashing out from off screen. Land comes in because he's a badass and he cuts it in two, and you could still have the other scene.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you have to? And there have been a couple of instances where I've thought this of stop making. So one of my praises early on was that first scene where Land gets to be a bad mamma jamma. He's a great fighter.
Which was Sanderson's. He had to push that in. He had to push that in.
Of Moraine is throwing around fire and earth and air and blowing up Trollocs left and right, but the ones that slip through and get in close, Land's there to cut them down so they never get close to her, right? So he has his moment, but then after that, if they want to give someone else a moment, then Land becomes weaker.
Or you could even had a one line with his when he said, I think something's following us. You could have added a line there. You could have said, but here in the ways, everything feels wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that okay, now he can't feel anything coming.
Which I think was something from the books, right? Is that the ways are so corrupted,
but it never gives you a warder perspective from that. I think you get Perrin's perspective on that, where everything smells wrong.
I thought he had said something to that effect to Moraine, but
but you could have just one line. It would have been there in 3 seconds of film time. In that exact same scene. You wouldn't even have needed a second scene. But the fact that they just totally did away with any beneficial part of being a warder, really.
Is when we were talking about The Witcher, it occurred to me that I hadn't thought of this before, but Henry Cavill would be a great Lan, and is the kind of person I envisioned when I was reading the books. And can you imagine?
Who he would have been better as? There's a character that the actor they have now isn't bad, but the way he was described and the way he acted in the books, Logain. It would have been like him as Superman. Yeah. Where he with his chest out the whole time.
Yeah. But I say Lan because he's such a bigger character, especially
Yeah.
from the very beginning. And can you imagine if you had someone who not only had that physical presence, had that acting ability, but knew the source material, like he knows the Witcher source material, pushing for, no, it needs to be like this because
Mhm.
page this in this book. And we don't have that. And I'm not faulting the actor because I think he's great. I think he's a great actor. I think he's being written and directed horribly.
Yeah, he's not a dark spot of this whole thing. I think
No.
the portrayal of that whole class of people, being the warder class. Then we get to,
Well, and my next note was about the Black Wind because it's related. Is in order to show off how powerful Nynaeve is, they neuter the Black Wind to what it is in the books. So
oh yeah,
minor spoiler, but it's not a big deal. In the book, you can hear the Black Wind before it gets to you.
mm-hmm.
But they have this physical representation, which you have to do in the on the screen, and the Black
Because
Wind
there's
is
all of a sudden
enveloping.
light in the ways. That's
Yeah. So the Black Wind is enveloping them and overwhelming them with the voice, and then Nynaeve does her thing with the power to show how powerfully she is. Well, you could have done that without neutering the Black Wind, because
mm-hmm.
it comes back in the books. Who knows if they'll reference it again in the frickin' series, but you're trying to set up something that is an almost existential threat. Okay, this is kind of Lovecraftian in its manifestation
Mm-hmm.
of so you could have had Loyal talking about it and talking about
Told
how
you it was relevant.
Oh, what's that?
H.P. Lovecraft.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see it. Yeah, I see it now. So Loyal does talk about it a bit, but then they kind of use that explanation of the Black Wind to kind of show Loyal's rambling professorial character, which you can do and still give pertinent information. You know, you could talk about the voice that you'll hear the voice before it gets to you. If it reaches us, it will destroy our minds. You know, have more panic when they start to hear the voice and they start to see that physical manifestation.
Now the things they heard, which was a variation, the things they heard, I can understand going that direction, because you have very little time to establish how horrible this thing is. So they're all hearing these thoughts that they have in their head. That's kind of, that was
that the voice was fine. I thought that was good, especially how it started off as an outside voice that became the actor or actress doing the voice itself, saying the lines themselves, to show that that's how it was infiltrating their mind and taking over their thoughts. I thought that was great. I just didn't understand why you had to make it the wind itself rather than the prelude to the wind as it is in the book, because then it sets this up as something that much more powerful. And
well, I have a sneaky feeling that this is the last time we see the ways.
And yeah, and but more to the point, if you have a good setup and payoff, then it makes your oh wow instance that much greater. If you had taken the time, just that smidge of time, to set up the ways as they actually are, to really make the audience afraid of the ways, then it makes Nynaeve's power that much more impressive.
Well, and they started it off right with her doing this accidental thing that saved a lot of people, because that was something she accidentally learned how to do over her course as a wisdom. Now they're taking it away from the Nynaeve story, where she accidentally just what would we say, neutralized one of the most powerful entities in the whole universe that is the Wheel of Time, with something that was totally outside of Nynaeve's wheelhouse. Nynaeve was the one of the most powerful, but she was powerful in a certain direction.
Yeah.
She was one of the best healers, and she did it differently than everybody else because she accidentally learned how to do it on her own. Whereas when they would do they're not doing a good job of the fact that different color groups, the red, the greens, the blues, the yellows, all have different specialties. And they're all better at different things. Like Alana would have been the person to do that to match and shit.
Also, they're not doing a good job of showing that different channelers have different levels of power. They've mentioned it when Moiraine was talking to Logain and saying you'll be like, a candle to the sun with his power, and then they showed Nynaeve channeling. So they've mentioned it, but it's like the way they've shown it is like everybody's down here in a cluster, and then these special people are way over here, when there's a much more significant gradation. Now, if you really want to know, I'm sure there's some nerd out there who has taken the time to rank the Aes Sedai, because they do reference each other.
I've seen it. I'll have to look for it again.
In power level of this person is more powerful than that person is more.
But what I'm getting to is the different specialties. So Nynaeve was in all the books, spoiler, the most powerful female channeler of that time. Outside of the Forsaken, which they haven't gotten to in the shows very much. So, but outside of them, she is the most powerful one. But when they get to manipulating weather, for instance, Elaine was way more powerful than her, because she was better at that. She had a knack for it. But when it came to healing, Nynaeve was better than all of them, including her power. But when it came to what was it that Nynaeve couldn't do very well? Metals. Egwene did metals.
Yes.
Yeah. So Egwene could manipulate metal, which was something rare with a female.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things that made her special. She can manipulate metal to make artifacts.
Yeah. And relics. In the same way that, if you're just looking at raw IQ, I have a high IQ. Chemistry and computer programming make my brain melt. I just, I don't get it. Some people have that knack, some don't.
Whereas when I was in 6th grade, I was doing algebra and the post algebra, but I was in remedial reading. So different specialties.
But even before you get to the specialty, I do think they could have at least taken the first steps to set that up so that they could get deeper into it later, when the Aes Sedai and the White Tower storylines become more prominent. But the point I was getting to was that if they had taken the time to set up those gradations of power, raw power, that I don't know. I haven't looked at one of those lists in a long time, but my guess would be, from what I remember of the books, I think Moiraine's like a top 10 in raw power.
Yeah, the ones they talk about were Swan
and Moiraine are up there.
Yeah, and Alana, Moiraine.
And if you had taken just that little bit of time, I don't know, maybe talk about that for 30 seconds instead of having kissy time with Moiraine and Swan. Just a thought. But if you had taken the time to set that up, then it makes the payoff of watching Nynaeve do this thing that's supposed to be impossible that much more amazing. That's one of the things you get from the books, is you have this well-established world where everyone thinks they know everything, especially like the well-educated, the nobles, and the Aes Sedai especially, is they know what's what. But then all of a sudden along come these people who, because they don't know any better, they just do, and they do things that are supposed to be impossible.
Well, and even with the Rand story, that they do blend I'm doing this because I'm unorthodox and I came from not knowing anything to I need to be taught. on some of these things. And that's a huge part of the story, which again, I think it's a part that's going to end up being written out with Asmodean, another biblical name there. But it just, they're not doing a good job of establishing that. So I'm not confident it's even part of the story going forward.
So
now they do establish a strength thing, because with with Agelmar's wife being would be accepted out of the tower, which I don't think was part of the books, but I don't mind that change. I think they tried to throw it in there to try to introduce that topic, but they didn't do a good job of it. And you weren't strong enough to stay in. So it had nothing to do with knowledge or ability or anything. It was purely her pre-born, predestined strength in the power that made her not part of it.
Like another character that we should have already met, but I digress. But you've
hold on.
Okay, so you brought up Agelmar's sister, which we're going to run out of time. I wasn't kidding when I texted you last night and said I paused about a dozen times to rant and take notes. But what did you think about Shinar when we got there? Here, come here, doggy. Let's shamelessly attract the internet here with doggy time.
I thought with using cultural markers for the visualizations and how they did everything, I thought they did a pretty good job there, except for some reason Uno was way out of place, because everybody was exactly along the lines you would expect with kind of an Asian, East Asian kind of motif. And then there's little short white Uno, which first of all, Uno was supposed to be super massively tall and imposing. And second of all, it's just, you're talking about casting and character selection. Why the heck did you have this one outlier? Okay, if everything's diverse, whatever, if we're going with this theme that you talk about and everything is diverse, then we do it that way. But then you have this place where everything's homogeneous except for this one person. And then you don't even develop him in any way.
The first thing that jumped out at me is, why did they feel the need to make Shinar a desert?
Okay, I didn't get that one either. I did not get that one either. Although I love the castle. I did like the fortress.
I did like the look of it because it is described as being very stark, very functional. This isn't like the White Tower, which is imposing in its size, but it also looks rather beautiful in its architecture.
Again, we want to look at copycatism a little bit here, plagiarism to some degree. The way Shinar and that area is described in the books is very eerily similar to the North in Game of Thrones.
Well, I think Eye of the World came out way before the first.
That's what I'm saying. So we're talking about copycatism, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So to me, to make the film adaptation, it would have looked a lot like a copycat to do that, something like that. But at the same time, the book, the Game of Thrones books, I think was actually copycatting the Wheel of Time.
The way it's described physically is the impression I got was like northern Russia. So you have
well, it's sparsely wooded, but still
sparsely wooded, steppe, very cold because you're very far north, and you do have mountains nearby.
Well, I mean the big mountains, which is
which form kind of the boundaries of the known world, which again would have been nice if they would have gotten into the geography of things. So I didn't understand the need to change especially since I don't know where they filmed that, but your film location is well established in Central and Eastern Europe. So why would you feel the need to go somewhere so different?
It's like Czech area.
Yeah. So that's where a lot of the filming is done, and that's why
those that aren't familiar with the books, this is Faldara right up here. I'm going to zoom in, and you look, the mountains of doom are right over the top, and that's what what the mountains they're supposed to be going through. And this is a little easier to look at map. You see the mountains,
And
the ridge.
that north-south mountain range is called the spine of the world because that's the known world.
Yeah. So when I said Western, this is what I meant. Everything west of the spine of the world. Because we were talking about Aiel, which live on the east of the spine of the world. And you see that little bit of Aiel waste here. Now there's Tarwin's Gap, which is just north of Fall Marn. Now, if you think of Game of Thrones, again, what did they have?
Ice wall. Yeah.
Yeah, this big giant wall of mountainous ice with little gaps in between that were manned by protections. So again, if you want to talk about copycatism, I would say this was probably the model for what we saw in Game of Thrones to some degree.
Well, but then you could say that's just copycatting Return of the King, because think so there were orcs roaming around in the civilized lands, but their homeland, so to speak, was by the volcano in those wastes, and then you had that pass, that narrow gap between the mountains that was covered by a citadel, and that's what you see when that gate is opening in Return of the King. It's a very similar idea.
Okay, so the final thought on that, since we do have to kind of push forward. Yeah, I like the way they did the mountains, the castle. I don't like the desert. It should have been a little bit better than that. But
well, another thing that jumped out at me is this isn't much of a spoiler. I'll try and keep it as light as possible here. But when they first enter Faldara, Lan tells them to uncover their faces. They've got their cloak hoods up because it's cold. Why? So they know you're not a Fade. It's a great opportunity to set up your world some more. One, because it shows you the kind of people who live here and what they have to deal with, like I was talking about with Witcher and the Monster Hunters, but then also because the Two Rivers kids kind of chuckle at it and then stop cold when they realize that Lan is deadly serious.
Yeah.
That to me was a very big missed opportunity and indicative of how the show just moves so fast that it becomes simplistic.
Now, remember, they've already seen a Fade's face at this point. So, no, they would have in the books too, because White Bridge and all of that happened.
But when you first encounter them, they've got the hood of their cloak pulled down over their eyes, so you can't see that they don't have any, which is a big freaking deal.
So fast forward, we've got the.
Oh, I still had stuff on Shinar. I think we're gonna have to split this up and pick this up later.
Well, I can probably go in about another 15 minutes.
Because, well, here's the next thought that I immediately noticed. Why was Agomar being so rude?
Yeah, because he was overly polite.
There's two big reasons for that, because the big inspiration for Shinar was the classic stereotypical samurai, which are honorable and polite. They even have tea ceremonies similar to Japanese tea ceremonies. So there's that, is showing the differences in cultures, which, as you'd been saying, they said they wanted to show the differences in cultures, even though they weren't showing it physically. Okay, which already with Uno, we've got a problem there. But then where's the difference in culture? Is the over politeness, but also another kind of missed opportunity is they don't do a good job of showing the different views people have of Aes Sedai. Aes Sedai in the Northlands are revered because of their power and their ability and willingness to fight Darkspawn. Okay, so why the heck? Again, it's like the changing of the Aiel garb into this white instead of the browns and grays that they wear. Why? I don't understand why you would do that.
Accelerating the story. They don't have time to set up this difference between North and South politics with the Aes Sedai, because they're going to throw everything into this. I realistically think they didn't know they were going to have a second season. We'll look at little things, and I'm going to try not to spend too much time on this because we got limited time, but they've recast Matt for the second season. I have a sneaky suspicion this guy that was Matt in the first season wasn't confident there was going to be a second season either, so he got another project going.
Didn't sign a long-term deal.
Didn't sign a long-term deal. Yeah, there's a lot of speculation why they don't have him. Which he's one of the worst actors in the whole series, so I'm not too.
Well, it's hard to tell. He is one of the worst actors, but it's hard to tell.
But they also horribly wrote his character
because it's one of the weaker characters in the season. One of the weaker written characters.
They didn't even do a good job of selling what they tried to sell in this last episode of why he's the way he is because of his father, which I still am, which brought back that anger a little bit. But realistically, if you know anything about cluster B personalities, this was an argument of some people calling Matt out for his bullshit and narcissistic enablers coming to his defense. So it really didn't make him look any better. So I don't know. It was that whole scene. I want to just delete that from my memory banks as far as this, because it really didn't play anything to the rest of the show. Realistically. You had a fight between Egwene and Rand, and Nynaeve had to apologize to Egwene, and Perrin just kind of sit there and mopes the whole time anyways. If they ever have a shirtless scene with him, he better be buff as hell, because that's the only thing that's going to save him for Perrin for me, because he's a blacksmith.
He is a gentle giant. That is his character from the books, and they've kind of set it up in the series by having him be so much more broad-shouldered than everyone and having him be a blacksmith, but they haven't shown that character. He's just that physically.
Well, let me draw a side by side in compare to so when we think of a big, strong, soft-spoken, gentle giant, that is still intelligent, right? So you can kind of picture that in your head. That's still a smart dude. All right. Now look at
Howie Long.
yeah, something like that. Whatever you want to picture in your head. But then you look at the portrayal of Michael Orr in The Blind Side. So Michael Orr is a big, giant, strong guy, football player, left tackle. So he's got to be intelligent. And he graduated college and he did well in high school to get to the college he went to. But he came from a very rough background and was taken in by another family. But in the movie, he kind of sits there and looks at you like, ugh.
Yeah.
The whole time, like he's got zero brain cells in his head. No, you can be uneducated and not be stupid.
This is someone who aspires to be a federal judge when he's done playing football, and could be one because he's smart enough that he's going to go to law school.
And that's why I stopped watching The Blind Side, because they made him look stupid. And then I saw interviews later. He's like, I hate that movie because they made me look stupid.
As opposed to undereducated, which is very different.
Yeah, or misguided, or whatever terms you want to put in there, or just not privileged, which would be a good way to use that word. So yeah, but you didn't have to make him look stupid. And now this Perrin that is developing here, he just kind of stands there like, half the time.
He looks stupid. Going on. He's stupid and whiny.
He looks like he doesn't know what to say. He doesn't want to say something. We got a group of people that work out here. This is a younger kind of group, and one of the girls in there, we're always twisting words around, and so she get this look on her face. She's like, like that, and I'm like, you're trying to think of what to say without us twisting it, aren't you? And she's like, yeah. So that's a look of someone who's actually intelligent and is just trying to figure out what to say versus someone who's just too dumb to say something in the moment
doesn't know what to say.
They can't keep up with the conversation. Again, it's just that blank stare versus actually just everybody. Okay, watch. Here's an example of a super genius. that is slow to speak. Daniel Schmachtenberger. If you don't know who he is, look him up. He's got some great interviews with Brett Weinstein. Seen him on Modern Wisdom was another show he was on.
That degree of person. Okay, I got you.
A conciliation project. So it's basically a global project to start projecting sense making onto the mainstream is his project that he's working on. But he's probably, I would say, probably one of the top 100 smartest people in the world. But he'll sit there for 30 seconds and go, and nobody stops him because they know what's going to come out of his mouth is going to be brilliant. That's what I picture Perrin as.
Well, we've referenced Peterson a lot, and he does that too. He is very precise with his words. He says,
so he sits and thinks about it for a second. Yeah, and he might even give a stopgap, like, give me a second on this, or
and something you miss in the show from the books is that Perrin is a blacksmith. He's an apprentice, which any foreign viewers we might have, or if you grew up in around the trades, that is still a thing that happens. But that's being taken on as an apprentice is a big effing deal in this kind of a setting, because technical crafts are rather closely guarded secrets, and training someone as an apprentice is a lot of work. So an apprenticeship was like a PhD level course, literally, because an apprenticeship was something that could last like 8 years. So we're talking PhD med school levels of education here. And one of the things Jordan does in the books is when we're in a chapter from Perrin's perspective, he thinks and uses a lot of blacksmithing analogies, which shows you why he's so slow to think, or slow to speak and act, because he's thinking things through.
And also he specifically says in later books that he wants to be the blacksmith that makes metal puzzles and things like that, versus the knives. And
he later on he enjoys making an ornate piece of iron, as long as it's not going to a noble, but I won't go into why. But he enjoys making these intricate, complicated things. And anyone who's ever even attempted any kind of crafting, like I tried to paint because I love paintings, and so I wanted to paint and I sucked at it, and it was frustrating because I'm not very patient. If you rush a craft, you get a crappy craft. So you have the fact that he's bigger and stronger than everyone else, not only in the village, but even around the village. So he's very slow to act because he doesn't want to accidentally hurt someone. That's how he grew up. And he's very slow to act in the mental stage, because if you rush a craft, you're going to destroy it. So you got to think it through. You got to measure twice and cut once.
Well, you want to parallel him to somebody. He is Hulk. Because he is capable of this rage and destruction, but he wants to think it through, and he wants to be Bruce Banner. Whereas what they're filming him as is he's freaking George from Of Mice and Men.
Oh my gosh, I hate you.
No, is it not true?
No, you're right. I hate it when you're right. Oh yeah, geez, yeah, that's what it is. He's George. Crap. Now I want to watch Tommy Boy. Hopefully some of you get that.
I take my pet and go.
If you don't get that, you need to go watch Tommy Boy the second you're done watching this.
Yes. Oh, I could watch that anytime. I got the Holy Schnikes edition. So okay, so we got to get to Lan and Nynaeve's interaction. We got to get to Min, since we finally see her.
Well, let's go with that, because that's my next note.
Yeah, Min first, then Nynaeve, and then the Rand part at the end.
My point with Min is that's how you do exposition without being in an exposition dump. That's a good interaction between Min
Where they
and
showed it through her point
Moraine,
of view.
and you
Yeah.
explain the world a little bit more. You explain, you get a feel for the history because they're talking about the pattern. So how hard was that? That's the kind of thing we've been ranting about here. Of, if you watch that interaction between Min and Moraine, this is what we've been saying when we've been ranting about why can't you just take 30 seconds to explain this thing better or at all? Because how hard was that? It was a good scene as well as a very useful scene.
Now, the problem is that that scene was good and then they ruined it. Because when Rand went back, she basically just told his fortune like a palm reader. She had a crystal ball and she could see his future. They should have stuck with, oh, I just see a thing or two here and there, and sometimes I know what it means.
I won't say they ruined it. It depends on where they go with it.
They just got too detailed. She was basically telling his future for him, and then he knew his future because the thing she wouldn't tell him. And
right. Well, what I liked is you got a little bit of Min's personality there because she was being snarky and sarcastic.
But it was just the information they got. No, the acting and the personality was good. It was the fact that she just ended up telling his fortune for him instead of, she could have easily got out of that last answer by being actual Min and saying, I just see some things here and there and I don't know what they all mean.
That's where I think they missed the boat with her, is that she talked, there was a little bit of that with Moraine when she was talking to her about what she sees, but sometimes she knows what a vision means. A lot of times she doesn't. She just sees the vision. That was part of the fun of the books, and where a lot of the forums and the fan speculation came from is, okay, here we have this
those that haven't read the books,
of what she means.
Jordan was constantly foreshadowing, and a lot of it was through Min's visions. It was through Egwene's dreams, Perrin's wolf dreams, and Min's visions.
Prophecy with a capital P, which is basically what Min is. It's prophecy with a capital P. So you could have done more there,
or less. Just don't have her read his fortune for him right in that scene.
You could have done more with less. Sometimes more is less, and less is more. And this was one of those instances where I thought the writing was decent and the actress was pretty good with portraying Min's personality. But the actual words weren't as good as they could have been, because there was no uncertainty.
And there still needs to be uncertainty. And I think that's the point, though, because they went into this last scene with a lot of certainty to get where they are going into the next episode.
And sometimes certainty is good. That's actually my next note. I don't know how much time, if you want to end on this.
We're probably going to have to. I got a lot of problems with the Nynaeve land scene.
I don't want to get there just yet because I have a lot of problems too.
Well, let me just say my quick bit on that is it should have ended in the hallway. Because that would have been strict to the books, with maybe him saying something to the degree of where he was saying in the tower later with in the books, where he was saying that you don't deserve a grave or you don't deserve a widow's whatever, or something like that. So that would have been an okay spot for that, but for where it went, it was completely not.
That's what I was referencing with Henry Cavill of, man, how great would it have been to have someone that knows the source material and could have said, look, he should say this instead because of this. So I've referenced Lord of the Rings, where they'll pull something from, from somewhere else in the books, or even an entirely different book. They'll pull a line because it works right here, and it explains the character, it reveals the character.
We'll just say in that scene, Nynaeve would have boxed her own ears.
But actually, that ties into what I wanted to complain about with Moraine, which is setup and payoff. one of my repeated gripes about the series is they don't take the time. They don't seem to have the maturity to develop the setup, so you don't get a good payoff. I complained in the cringy sexy time scene that why the hell is Moraine so uncertain? That's the opposite of who she is. And then here, when she's talking to Lan about who is the dragon and what are we going to do, she is dead certain, and I use that word specifically, of I will not allow someone to live if I think there's even the possibility that he's the dragon and that he might turn to the dark, because we cannot allow that to happen, period, ever. And I am so certain I'm willing to kill someone who's barely an adult if that's what it takes.
It's a good point.
Where was that earlier? That's who that character is. That's when that character is at her best. And that, again, as I've been ranting about, that is a strong female character. That's why Moraine is so great in the books, because she is incredibly strong, even though Jordan makes a repeated point to point out that she is literally shorter and smaller than every other woman.
Yeah, she's like a modern female gymnast. She's tiny. But yeah, let me bitch about the blight for like 30 seconds. That was a horrible depiction of the blight.
Yeah.
Per the description. It was lazy. It was like, let's just make it overgrown with this bramble that is uniform, by the way. Uniform bramble. Let me just make it overgrown with that and we'll call it a day. Versus taking a regular scenery and making it look like it's dying. Making it look like it's infected, which is what the description was in the book.
Yeah.
We go back to, they did it in the freaking infected. 80s. They did it in the 80s in the Labyrinth, the bog of eternal stench. Could have done that, right? We got all the CG technology that we have, and they did a better job in a freaking Muppet show in the 80s.
And plus you had Bowie's giant codpiece, which, is disturbing or alluring, depending on your point of view.
Don't knock Jareth. He's one of my heroes.
Exactly.
Oh, we need to get onto our D&D nerdiness at some point. That brings back memories. But we can't ramble. We're gonna have to end there. We'll go into the Rand projecting himself as the knowing he's the dragon at that point, which is about a book and a half early.
But my ending point there is, look how great that scene was, how strong that made Moraine in isolation. But then if you take the series as a whole, it doesn't work. You have this great scene, but you've completely undermined it with all these other stupid things you did before. So you don't have the emotional impact. You don't have the payoff.
Yeah. I hear you there.
Going back to where we started with The Witcher, is one of the great things about the way they have those three separate storylines and the way they weave them together is that at the end, when it finally comes together, it's an incredible emotional payoff, because you've taken the time to have the steps leading up to it, and you have not done anything that would undermine it along the way.
All right. Well, in our last episode on this series, we're going to have the last episode of the series. And here's my prediction going into it. They set this up that Lan is certain because it's still going to be the way I said it's going to be. They're all going to be something like that.
Yep.
I think this is their way of making Ta'Veren a thing. Is they're all the manifestation of this thing,
rather than doing it in the way it is in the books, which is they're all important, but so I think Matt staying behind lends a lot of credence to the annoying crap you said already that I hate you for making these predictions. I think the fact that he actually did stay behind and isn't presumably is not going to be in the finale. I think that lends a lot of the credence to some of the predictions you've been making.
Well, and there's also another prediction here. So we've got two instances that lead you to believe Peyton Fane is in Faldara. The figure coming out of the ways,
and the fact that he was in the recap.
The fact, well, and Perrin sees him in town.
Oh yeah.
Well, and, okay, so 3, and the fact that he was in the recap, but they never show you the face of the person who came out of the ways. So there's a possibility that could be Matt.
That would be stupid, but
it would be stupid, but we've seen where this show has gone already.
Yeah,
so there's a possibility that could be Matt, but Peyton Fane is still in town. And they're throwing a lot of smoke and mirrors out, and Matt follows them, and maybe he still has the dagger or something along those lines. And
all right, I think we need to take a little time tomorrow to finish this episode up, because I think there's more to rant about with this episode. So
okay,
we'll see if we can have time to do that.
Yeah, we can do that. I'm about to go to a Christmas party, but it's not going to be one of the crazy kinds. So
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, everyone.
Yep.
May the new year bring us stuff that sucks less.
and as a disclaimer, since we have to for the YouTube overlords, if you took any medical advice from this episode, then you probably are going to win a Darwin Award anyways. So
thank you for getting out of the gene pool.
Yes, thank you very much for your participation in this event called life.
And for those of you non-Darwin Award winners, we will see you next time.
Yes.